Hello and welcome to Differential Discussions. I'm Melissa.
And I'm Dave.
And we're here for a special guest series. And today our guests are Jaden Peguero and Eliana Sousa, recent graduates. A year ago they graduated, and full disclosure, they were our students, so we know them. But they are here to talk about transitioning from student life to adult life, working life. So Jaden and Eliana, welcome.
Hi, thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, we're excited to have the two of you.
So do you guys want to maybe introduce yourselves or maybe talk about, you like long walks on the beach or whatever? I don't know. Jaden?
Sure. Well, like Melissa said, it's honestly so weird calling you Melissa. So I switch back to professor, then just don't mind me because that was just so weird calling you Melissa. But yeah, my name's Jaden. I graduated last year. I started working right away. I worked at Brockton Hospital as a generalist, but I mainly did blood bank and hematology. And then recently I moved to Charlton Memorial Hospital in Fall River, and right now I'm primarily doing blood bank.
Excellent. And what shift do you work, Jaden?
So I did second shift at Brockton, which honestly, I really, really enjoy second shift. And once I'm done training at Charlton, I'll be back on second. But right now I'm training on first.
Great. Eliana?
So after graduating, I immediately started working myself, and I took a job at Good Samaritan Medical Center in Brockton, and I work in the core lab. So that includes everything such as chemistry, hematology, coagulation, urine, and blood bank. So I do a little bit of everything, and we rotate through every department. So you get to be in every department, get the exposure of every area. The only thing we don't have there is micro. So I don't have as much micro exposure, but that's good with me because I'm not crazy about doing all that micro work. So, and I also work on second shift as well. I love second shift. It's the best. So
Great.
I think so too.
Yeah, no, I'm an early morning. The earlier I can wake up, the better.
I'm classic second shift all the way.
Yeah.
I ended up doing a blended shift a little later on in my med lab career. It was like what was it, 12:30 to 9 or something like that, and I loved that shift. That was awesome.
All right. Well, if you guys could just start out talking a little bit about how did you manage life as students? How did you deal with life? How did you get through the program?
Well, I'm someone, at least from my own personal experience, I did an extra year in the program. So it was a little hard, like trying to come back after failing that exam, that one exam that set you back a whole year. But once I came back and redid everything, I definitely started to study a lot more. So that was a big thing to manage, time management. I think you guys stressed that sophomore year. Time management. We had a time management presentation, I'm pretty sure, by Professor Hart. She's the best time management person ever. But it was easier the first 3 years of the program. But then once senior year came, I kind of dove completely, just immersed myself in school, didn't do anything else but go to school during the day for intensives, come home and study, and do it again the next day, and then have weekends off, but still study every weekend.
Yeah, school was definitely the first year you're very relaxed about things like freshmen. You're stressed about being going to college because it's different than high school. So you're adjusting to that, but it's not so scary because you're just starting to dip your toes into the water of the program. So you're like, oh, this isn't too bad. And then, and you're just mixing, the extra stuff that you have to do on the side, just as your extras. And then you go into sophomore year and you're like, all right, you're getting more into it. You're like, this is interesting. You get the lab exposure. And, you start meeting more professors and you're like, oh, this is good. And then junior year is bam, you're getting smacked. You're full med lab, every day, labs all the time. And then you're like, whoa. And it's that realization, oh, okay, so I'm actually in the program. like this is really happening. And it's great to have that exposure at the same time. I liked being slowly brought into it, and then being able to then to finally delve into, actual all the med lab science stuff, and then really focusing. And then senior year, totally just, it was lectures and labs. And then like Jaden said, it was studying all the time because you had to know your stuff and had to prepare for those intensives. So it was a lot, but it was all worth it. It was definitely all worth it. You have to go through the more difficult things to get where you want to be. You have to work hard because that's how you just get where you want to be.
I actually recently met with a student in the program. I think she was in her sophomore year, the first semester. Professor Scarano had actually reached out to me and asked me if I could meet with her because she wasn't really sure how she felt about the program and stuff like that. So when I met her, one of the big things was she's like, I just can't wait to get in the lab. And I'm like, you're going to have more than enough time in the lab, sweetie. I'm like, enjoy the calmness of freshman and sophomore year, because junior year hits, you're going to be like, oh,
Yeah.
Professor Rubian wasn't joking when he said you were going to study all day. He used to tell us that all the time. You guys got to get used to it. You're going to study every day junior year, and be like, okay, Professor Rubian, whatever you say. Yep, I'm sure.
And you don't believe it until you're actually doing it. And it's, again, that time management thing that you brought up. It's hard too, because also on the side too, besides the studying at home, you also, typically people all have a job. Like I had a job, I know you had a job. So it's learning too to juggle having a job, doing school at the same time, because it's not the same as when you're in high school and you have a little bit on the side, and then you can just, go to work and not worry about it as much, because then when you come home from work in college, you're like, okay, I'm going to go study again. It's just constantly preparing yourself and getting ready, because it's important to focus on what you're doing and to make sure, you get to a place, not necessarily, I'm not advocating not for good grades. You want to get good grades, but you want to also make sure you're understanding the material that you're learning and you're getting a grasp on the information, because that's super important. Because if you're not really fully understanding it, then it becomes difficult to continue. And then at that point, that's when it's important, you have your professors that help you. You go to, office hours, you stay a little extra at the lab, you look at maybe a couple more diffs in hematology because you're not sure, whatever it is, because it's important to have that foundation so you can then be ready to be out there in the real world.
Yeah, when I had to repeat my junior year, I was upset, but then when I came back the second time and really was focused more, I'm like, oh yeah, I was not ready. There was no way if I would have somehow made it through junior year that first time, I would have gone to senior year and been not ready, probably wouldn't have passed. But going back the second time, actually taking the time to, because we get really theory heavy and theory based junior year, so you really need to know what you're talking about, and I definitely didn't the first time around.
Right. And you have that different perspective too, because you went through that, so you got a different understanding of how it's important, because we want to delve into the work part of it, the hands-on part so much, but you have to learn the theory first. And it's difficult to bury yourself in the books and force yourself. Sometimes it felt to go through certain things when you're having a hard time. You're like, I just can't understand this. And you're just pushing yourself through it. And then you're like, okay, I think I understand it enough to go into the lab and then work on it. And then when you go into the lab and you're like, okay, yes, this makes more sense now. So.
Awesome. Thank you for that.
Yeah, no, that was great. And Jaden, you had mentioned that you would study on the weekends, but you also made some time for yourself, right? Eliana, did you find it, how hard was it to find some time for you to,
I would try to find at least a little time, whether it was, an hour or something, or, if I was doing something and then taking a break, because at the same time, you can't have yourself so immersed that you don't take a break, because then you just feel you go to a point where you're like, oh my gosh, I can't do this anymore. And then you can't have that mindset either, because then that's hard to come back from when you feel
Burnout.
like, oh my gosh, I'm like burnt out,
Yeah.
can't do it anymore. So that's also not even healthy for yourself either, just pushing yourself so hard that you feel like you're just exhausted in every single way. So you also have to balance, again, more time management. Time management is like your best friend. Even though it's definitely was not my best friend for a while. I've gotten much better at it. I will say. I would be terrible at time management.
Just
And
for reference, I didn't pay them to say any of this.
I was literally just about to bring up the fact, like, Melissa must be giddy as heck inside here.
Yeah, she is. She's like, time management.
yeah, it's true though. And I would say it takes years to have a good grasp on time management. And I mean, you hear it for, my gosh, you don't know. I would say I've probably heard it since like middle school, because like they start you young, and I can get why, because it's hard to have at least decent time management. I'm not going to ever be perfect. I've already moved past that point. It's not going to be perfect, but at least being able to put my time. Listen, I have a little calendar on my phone now, and some people might say I'm, oh my gosh, like that's like you're old for doing that. I have to. It's a way to manage my.
Oh yeah. Everything. I have a planner. Everything's in my phone too. Like anytime I go anywhere now, when I go to dinner, reservations.
Yes, I do that too. Yes, need that too. But yeah, it's so, even now, because a big thing too is, especially going out, I feel like I'd be like, oh, I'm always late. Now I'm more punctual about that too. So the time management has really worked. But yeah, it's important. And as many times as, anywhere whether you're in high school, you're in college, people will tell you it's important. And, people might be like, yeah, whatever. It really is. And you don't learn it until you go through being crunched for time and everything. And then you're like, wow, I should think about management. And then you do, and you're like, oh, that feels so much better. I don't feel so stressed. And like everything's falling down on me like a ton of bricks kind of thing.
Yeah. I my thing with time management too a lot was like with my studying, because I learned like if I sat and studied for too long, or I like oversaturated my brain, I'd go into an exam and completely blank. I'd be like, I have no idea what I looked at last night. Like I've been looking at this for 6 days straight. And as soon as I would get there, I would like freak out. So like I had to like slowly teach myself like, all right. And honestly, Professor March Missler was great at teaching us this too. Like you can study for 3 hours, but take a break every hour. Like go outside, go for a walk, eat something. Like don't study until 2 a.m. Like the night before an exam, I would study until like 8, 9, the latest. And then just hang out, relax, go to bed, wake up in the morning, maybe do a little review if there was something I like didn't remember that well. And then just like, all right, what I know is what I know. And that's it. I'll figure it out after.
Definitely.
I know. Kiss you both.
I know it's definitely true too. I mean, we want to cram to an extent, because we all do. We all cram to an extent, but cramming like everything the night before is just not a good idea. It's not beneficial to you, because you won't remember the information long term. You won't, and then even the next day, sometimes you won't even remember it even for then. And it's just not.
No, seriously.
It's not beneficial to you and for long-term purposes. And you learn, you're like, okay, you study a little bit, you go home, say after a day of lecture or, a day of lab, and you have your notes, and then maybe you like adjust it, and you're like, okay, you look over it a little bit, and you're like, okay, tomorrow, I'll look over it again. When you slowly start looking over things, it's just like putting that slowly into your head, and then your brain then again, like over time, you just start to recall the information. You're like, okay, yeah, I remember that. So it's easier to do it that way versus just shoving everything in front of your face for a couple hours and being like, I need to learn all this information right now, because it's overbearing on yourself and just not helpful to you as a student either, because you put yourself under all this stress that you have to learn everything super quick, and you end up hurting yourself because you're just forcing yourself to learn quickly instead of being able to have the information so you can use it for the future of your job. So
Awesome. All right. So finishing school, right? When you did the internship the last semester, do you think the internship, that clinical practicum, is a good representation of what working life will be like?
I want to say, yeah, like all of the people that I worked with, I did mine at Beth Israel and Milton. Everybody was really great. Like all of the techs were obviously like, there's a huge age gap in the lab. So a lot of the techs had been there for probably longer than I've been alive. And some of the other techs would be like close to age, former UMass graduates. And once they kind of saw that you got the hang of things, like they really let you like be independent. Like when I was in chemistry, I was doing QC in the morning, like on both the analyzers, starting to do maintenance on another one. Like I would just come in and start the day. When I was in hemo, same thing. I would just come in and like start the day. So it was definitely like a good way to teach you like, okay, like this is what the workflow is kind of like in the morning. You usually start with your daily maintenance, like QC, there's usually temps in the morning, sometimes some kind of inventory, like, and that's pretty much like the same, it runs the same way in every lab. Like now that I've experienced more than one lab, like it's kind of nice to like, cool to compare, like, okay, this is how their daily workflow is, this is how their daily workflow is, like, and see how it differs and like kind of see which one I like better.
Yeah. I think it's funny because like we mentioned terms like QC and maintenance, and like I don't think students ever really, understand what that means.
I used
Right?
to be like, why do they say Q? Like, why do I care about QC and maintenance? I'd be like, why? What am I doing with QC?
I know, so true. So
And then you learn, you're like, oh, QC is very essential to every part of my day, and I am a blessed woman if it comes out the first time.
so true, especially in chemistry when we're running QC. If that all comes out and we don't have to calibrate anything, it's a good day. It's
Yeah,
just,
it's going to be a good day. You're like, all right, all my QC ran the first time.
you're like,
Nobody talked to me.
it's
We're
like,
good.
oh, thank you so much. So true though. But I would say it definitely was a good representation. I went to Tufts up in Boston, so I got, that large hospital scale. So it was really nice to see every department and also extend beyond that because they had some specialty things that you don't see at smaller hospitals. So that was really nice. I was going to say, I like the heme department a lot, which I know Melissa will be really happy about, of course.
Biased though.
Yeah, I'm biased,
I
but I loved it because there was so many parts of heme that I never really thought about when I was in school, and you got to see it there, and it was really interesting, and I loved seeing all those different. I remember I sat down with Heidi there, and she was great, super funny. But I sat down with her and we looked at so many diffs, and it was crazy because it was awesome just to see all those different things that I had learned about in school and even things that I hadn't seen yet. And she was showing me, and I was like, wow, this is so awesome. It was great to see something different and being able then to put pieces together and say, oh my gosh, I remember learning this or they're learning that. So it was really great to kind of come full circle with everything. It was just awesome.
Yeah.
But I would definitely say though, you do see in a way how it's different from school because there's a lot of things too that in school I would say I didn't like as much, and I would thought, oh, it's good, but I wouldn't be like, oh yeah, this is what I want to do. Like definitely I would say chemistry, obviously in school when you're learning about it, it's so theory based, and it's so feels like sometimes you're like, oh my gosh, you're like, this is so much to learn. Am I gonna comprehend this all? And then when you go out into the world and you realize all the instruments are doing it for you, and you're like, wow, you're like, okay, but you know at the same time the theory behind it, so you know what's going on. But it's so funny like seeing that transition because you learn all this information and you're like, oh my gosh, I have to recall all of this when I get out there. And you do and don't to a sense because there's also things like the manuals out there, so you can look to things also for help if you feel like, oh, I don't remember this as much. So it's really nice. But I definitely appreciated the whole first full circle aspect of being able to feel like, okay, now everything's coming together, because you definitely feel like up until senior year, you're like, is this all going to come together yet? You're like, how about now? It's just like you wait so long, and then at the end you're like, and it was definitely worth it at the end. After those 4 years, it was a lot. It was a lot of studying, a lot of long days, and definitely being stressed a lot. There was definitely a lot of stress. It's just unfortunate to avoid. It's just trying to minimize stress as much as you can, but it was definitely all worth it. So, and that experience, I loved being able to go up to Boston and seeing a larger scale hospital and being able to go out there and use what we learned. That was definitely really excited. I was excited when we were going. I was like, I can't wait.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I felt like I had like a little bit of a different experience because BI in Milton is more like a community-based hospital. Like it's pretty small. I think there's like 250 beds there, maybe.
Yeah.
And it kind of serves like, they are starting to branch out more. Like when I was there, they had acquired an urgent care in Quincy, and like they had another urgent care that they were taking care of, but it really was like a really small community-based hospital, which I really enjoyed. And I think that's kind of why I stuck with that kind, because like I think Boston is like so interesting, and I know that they see some really cool stuff up there, but I don't know. I like enjoy knowing that I'm like close to the community, and it's more so like, I don't know, just like smaller, not as many people. Because honestly, the other thing that I learned is that first shift, there are so many people on first shift.
It's a whole different world when you see
A whole different world, like compared to like second shift. When I started second shift, I'm like, this is great. I'm like, there's way less people here. It's like calm, cool. Like everybody's kind of doing their own thing, but we're also kind of like, we're working with each other because it's very much like a teamwork environment, especially on second shift because you don't have as many people.
Definitely. It's the same thing at where I work at Good Samaritan. And that's the other thing too, is I did go from seeing a bigger hospital and having an internship there, and then going to a smaller hospital for right now. And again, I kind of enjoyed the same thing of having more of a community aspect. And also because I loved Boston, and while I did love it so much, it's so far from me, and it's just the commute and everything. And I just, at that point, I was like, I can't do it. And then when I found the job that was available at Good Samaritan, it had really good perks. And I was like, I think I want to do it. I think I want to jump on it. And I did. But I definitely agree. First shift is crazy busy, and it's kind of an everybody to themselves sort of thing, because everybody is so busy. And it's interesting to see that compared to second shift, because on second shift, everybody is really like, we're all a team, like all the time in the lab, because everybody works together. But on second shift, it's really different. Everybody really is like a team. Like we all work together. We all help each other. If something is going on and somebody needs help, we go over and help them. So it's really nice to see that kind of interaction on second shift, besides it being the best, obviously. I mean,
yeah. Yeah, it's like fun. I don't know. I like just the quietness and calmness of second shift. It's funny because our senior hemotech had stood one night from first shift into second. And there was like one point at the night where it was just like really quiet, like just like noise level wise, like everybody was just in their work, like, because there's a lot of hustle and bustle in first shift, and there's just always noise and people coming in and out, and a lot of phlebotomists and everything. And like second shift is just so quiet. I remember he like came up to me, he was like, Jaden, why is it so quiet? I was like, Al, that's second shift. I'm like, we really like it really calm, serene, and quiet here. Like I'm like, this is why I like second shift. I'm like, there's way too much going on first shift. It's like,
yeah. I know.
I'm sorry to step on you. I really like that you all mentioned the teamwork aspect of second shifts, because it really did feel like the solidarity, and first shift never really had that feel to me, although I never worked it consistently.
I'm a first shifter, and I agree.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not anything, towards people on first shift, because they have a different workflow, and it's totally different, because things are happening during the day, like people are getting seen, so outside lab stuff can be coming in, and it's just a lot of things. People go in during the day for, like pre-admission testing. So it's a lot of different things that's going on during first shift. There's times that we get straggler things like that, but ultimately it's not crazy busy the same way. And it's this, like Jaden said, everybody is more relaxed on second shift. When we come in, people sometimes will be freaking out, and we're just like, okay, no problem. Like, we'll take care of it. We're all just like, yeah, like it's all good. And then, we all come in and we're all like, hey, how's it going? We're all boisterous and laughing, and everybody's kind of like, what's going on with those people? Like, are they okay? Like, why aren't they serious? Like, like guys, because it's so different. And, I definitely give them a lot of kudos, because first shift is a really tough shift to work consistently for years. And a lot of people do it, but there's just so much going on. So I definitely give people props that stay on first shift, because they have a different workload. But the second shift flow is just really different, and you appreciate it when you're on second shift. It's really nice to have those people that, you're able to ask them questions, and, you have the time to go over things and whatnot, and you can, just have a nice, peaceful work environment. It's really nice. It's
Great. And thank you. That was one of the things we were going to ask you about, for the, like, with the dynamics of first shift, second shift. So you already hit one of the questions on the list.
And I have worked a bit into third shift, so that's even.
Yes,
okay.
I've done third shift a couple of times as well.
Yeah.
Honestly, I didn't mind it. When I had done it, I would do like, I'll work second shift, and then I'll work like 4 hours into third shift, and then like a day shift
to like 3 in the morning.
Yeah, like a 4 in the morning. And then somebody from first shift would always come in early. And there was one time actually recently during the snowstorm that we had in like March, where I ended up getting snowed in at the hospital, and our third shifter called out. So I was only going to work first and second. I had like signed up for this double weeks ago, and I had no idea it was going to snow. I was like, oh yeah, this double sounds good. I'm already here on Saturday night. It's fine. I'll come in, work the day. Cool. Nope. I got there. Took me like 2 hours to get to Brockton. And so I ended up working first shift, slept through second shift, and then woke up and worked third shift, like 11 to 7. And honestly, I give third shifts people props, because it's usually just two techs, like how it is at Brockton. It's like I usually would cover blood bank and hemo, and then the other person would do just chemistry, but they would also do like, they did like the rapid COVIDs, like they would do like the little micro stuff that we do overnight. And like sometimes too, like I would get kind of annoyed, like when I would work first shift, and if I'd come in and there'd be like 12 diffs, I'd be like, what were you doing all night? Why aren't these diffs done? Like, why have these been sitting here since 4 or 5 a.m.? And then you work third shift for the first time, and you get your first like morning drop of like your daily standing order labs on the inpatients, and you're like, that's why they didn't do all the diffs. I'm like, oh, right, because you're running around like a psycho trying to do everybody's daily CBCs, and there's 5 people who have criticals, and you got to call it. And then we do a lot of BBGs at Brockton. I was doing BBGs all morning, which thankfully most of those are routine, but like, it's just when you have to stop and call a critical, like it disrupts your workflow. You're like, oh my God, all right, I have to stop. I have to sit, I have to call this, make sure it's done. And then you get another one, and it's like, oh, and then you don't even remember diffs, and you're like, oh my God, I have 10 diffs waiting for me. And now first shift is here, and they're going to hate me. But
Jaden, just for reference, what are BBGs?
BBGs? Oh, venous blood gas.
Yeah, just because some of the folks who watch our channel are like, I don't know what that is. So that's why
I know I have to like, I'm so like with like, I guess like the lab lingo now, like I'll say something like, what are you talking about? I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. Like, I'm just.
Yeah, it's all right. Dave and I do that all the time. We catch each other and we'll be like, oh, we got to explain that.
Oh yeah, and a differential, as we all know. But
they should know what diffs are. This is differential discussions.
Okay, just making sure.
All right, and then how did you transition to, well, being an adult and working person from school, but then you also had to study and take your certification exam?
Yeah. So like for me personally, I was I got the job at Brockton like before I graduated. So I was like hired and did like my onboard stuff. But I had asked them if I could push back like my start date to like June. I think I did. I think we started the first week of June because Jennifer, Tessa, and I all started on the same day. But yeah, we started in like June because we graduated, I think like May 15th. So I took those 2 weeks off to just kind of like take a break because I'd been in school for so long, and I'm like, I'm gonna start working full time. Like I want to take a little break. And I definitely used a lot of that time too to study. And I kind of kept the same principle with myself. Like I really can't overstudy for the board exam. Like I can't just like overdo it. And I used Lab CE, which this isn't like a plug for Lab CE, but Lab CE is great for anybody studying for their board exams. That was my go-to. A lot of the questions on there were very similar, if not the exact same to the ones on my board. So, but yeah, I took those 2 weeks to like really study, and like then I started working, and I would still study too, just take a lot of practice exams because their practice exams are great, like super helpful. But yeah, that was kind of how I did it. And then I started working, and I took my exam. I started work, I think, on June 7th, and I took my exam that Friday on June 11th, just to kind of like get it out of the way. And I passed the first time.
I did something similar. I did take off after graduating. I did take off a few weeks. I actually had a little trip planned to Florida, so I went away, and it was nice just to do something that was for myself and just like a relaxation purpose. I would definitely say, and this isn't like to say everybody should do it, but I think definitely taking a little time off before you start your job is a good idea. As long as whatever company you're going to work for will be okay with it. And typically they are. Like if you push off the date, especially since you're a new grad, they know you have to take the test and everything. And I also wanted to start working on studying for the test too, because I wanted to take the certification as soon as I could, because I didn't want to wait super long, because again, once you start waiting and just pushing it off, it's all the information slowly starts to leave your brain. So, but it was really nice to just have a little time off. I finished off working at my other job. And then after that, I think my start date at my job was actually this June 7th too. That's why that's hilarious that Jaden said that. I think that was my start date too at my job at, could have a party up in Brockton. I can't believe we didn't know this.
I know, seriously.
So, but then I started, and then I think I took mine, it was a little closer to the end of June, because by the time I did look, a lot of the slots were already filled up. So, which was fine though. I was at least happy I wasn't pushing it off to August or September, because I really didn't want to push it off that far, because I was like, oh no. But I used tools. I did use Lab CE, which was great. It's super helpful. I did get the ASCP, the book that they have for the certification. That was really helpful too. So, because you can see how they format their questions, so you can kind of get a gist about, okay, so this is how they'll sort of ask something like this. And it's good because, you know, you see questions that you know, and you'll see questions that you probably won't know the answers to, because there's going to be some questions on there that you just won't know, and you just give the best educated guess you can. So, and then plus that, and then I did some of those practice exams too, because again, it was really helpful to see, you know, how they would ask. And it's a good review too, because it ties, you know, the stuff from school together and all of that. So it's really helpful. So, and then when I took my exam, I was so happy when it was over. That was probably one of the most like stressful things I have ever done so far. Because you're like, oh my gosh, you're like, you have a certain time frame. At first you're like, am I going to finish it in this time? But you do, like, there's definitely like enough time, but you feel like at the beginning, you're like, oh my gosh, am I really going to take, I think they give you like 3 hours. Is it?
Yeah.
3 hours?
Like 3 hours for the 100 questions.
Yeah. And I was like, oh my gosh, am I going to need all 3 hours? I was like, oh God, I hope not. I was like, that's a long time. Because you also, when you're taking the test, you want to have the kind of mentality that, okay, you're going to walk in, you have the knowledge that you studied, you do the best that you can, and don't stress yourself on things that you might not know as well. You want to have a good foundation on, everything, yes, but there's always going to be things that you might not know. So when you come across a question that you're like, oh no, I didn't see this, or I don't recall this, don't get flustered and feel like, oh my gosh, I need to know this one question, because then as you continue the test, you start thinking about that one question as you go throughout the test, and you just like stress yourself out and even more. So you just go in, you have just go in with, all right, I got this. Like, don't put yourself in a negative mind, put yourself in a positive mindset that you're like, okay, I got this. Everything's going to be good. And if you come across a question, you don't know, you'll get flustered a little bit because you'll be like, oh my gosh, I don't know this. But just get to that point, like, all right, I'll give it my best educated guess that I can, and I'll move on. And then you can always go back to it later too, because they give you at the end, a little like synopsis if you want to check anything and whatnot. So if you always feel like, oh my gosh, I think I remember, you can always do something like that too. It's sort of like taking a regular test where you're able to kind of go back and, whatnot. But definitely was so happy when it was over. I passed my first time. I was so happy when I did. I remember I texted Melissa and I said, I passed. It was like such a good, because we were talking at that point about working on my case study that I had just done, and, working on that. And she was like, make sure you tell me when and I did. And I was like, guess what? I passed. And it was like such a relief and such a happy moment. And I was so happy when I left, and I called my parents and I told them, and I was like, oh my gosh, I passed. It was such an exciting moment, especially when I got that little thing when they send you the official thing, you passed, and you're like, oh my gosh. And you see your little credentials next to your name. It's such an exciting moment. It's so hard to explain.
Yeah, it makes all of the crazy stress and the many tears, because I cried.
Yeah, there was definitely
many times throughout the program, especially doing an extra year. I just had extra time to cry in the program.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's such a surreal feeling. It's like, oh my God, I did all this hard work, and it's worth, it really was worth it. All the crazy times that I spent studying, and it feels good too, because it's all right, I passed, I'm certified now, now I can really, really start my career. Not that not having your certification right away is a big deal, because I know somebody who didn't pass the first time and they just recently retook it and passed. Because most hospitals, they're okay if you don't pass the first time. They'll allow you to still work. There's little things that maybe you can't do because you don't have your certification, but they're very understanding about whatever, you taking it in the time frame that you feel comfortable, because not everybody was comfortable taking it right away.
Absolutely. That's a good thing to bring up too, Jaden, is take it when you're ready. Most students want to take it right away just to be done with it. But, I do know several students who waited a few months to take it and were fine.
Yeah.
Not me. 2 days after graduation, I took it, but all right. So Jaden, you got a job at your place of internship.
Nope. Well, I did get a job offer there, but I ended up going to Brockton Hospital instead.
Oh, okay. All right. So you both got jobs at different places then.
Yes.
From your internships. So can both of you just kind of talk about then transitioning to being a working tech? How has that changed from being a student and, even when you're not at the internship, having to go home and study, to now being a working professional?
It's definitely a big transition. I think I really do though, the whole, after going through clinicals, because it's kind of you're a training employee. So I kind of, when I went into the job, I was like, all right, I'm just going to kind of be the same way I was as a student, ask questions, take a lot of notes, don't be afraid to ask things. You know what I mean? You're a fresh tech, so obviously you're not going to know everything. You're not going to get everything right away. And all of the people who are training you, well, I'll say most, because not everybody is the sweetest, but most of the people who are training you understand that too. And a lot of them too, like I said earlier, there is a definitely big age gap in the lab. And a lot of the people I've worked with love to tell me that like, you guys are the new generation of the lab. Like you're the new people who are going to take our spots when we retire in a couple of years. Like, so everybody was just super helpful. It was definitely nice though. I think like the first time I left work and I was like, oh my God, I don't have to go and study. What am I going to do with all, I think my biggest thing, like I had so much free time. I just didn't know, like, I was like, what do I do? I'm so bored. Like, I think maybe a month or two after we graduated and I was working, I reached out to Professor Rubian and I was like, I think I want to go back to school. And he was like, Jaden, do you really want to go back to school or are you just bored right now? I was like, maybe I'm just like bored right now. Like I've been in school for so long. I'm so used to revolving my life around like studying and tests and all that. Like that when you finally get like that free time just to like do whatever, because you don't really, you kind of just, you gotta go to work. You go to work and then you kind of, it was a little hard to kind of like finding like little things that I like to do because you don't really have that much time for hobbies during school. So it's definitely a big thing, learning kind of like what to do in your free time. But it was definitely nice once you're able, like once you're fully trained and you get like the privilege to like verify things. Like that's the biggest thing. Once you can verify things, it's like, okay, you're for real. Like I can verify that result. Like, yep, all right. Once that happens, you're like, oh, okay. Like now I'm a big girl in the lab now. Like I can do stuff by myself. It's definitely like a little confidence booster. And like, it just feels good when you start to do things or you catch a mistake or you find something really cool. Like the first time I found Babesia, we actually have a lot of it in Brockton. I saw them many a times this summer, but the first time I found it, I was like, oh my God. And like, I don't think the patient was like admitted for that. Like they were admitted for something else and they just happened to have a CBC that reflects to diff. And yeah, we found it and I was like, oh my God, this is so cool. Like now they know what's wrong with them and they can treat them. And it's like, this is what I waited for. Like, this is what I was waiting for. But yeah, it was cool. It was a nice transition, I guess.
So true though. It's so funny when you first go into the lab and you're training because it feels like you're in school in a way because somebody's like, still watching you while you're starting out. But then when you get to the point that nobody's watching you, you're like, you look and you're like, oh, like I'm doing this on my own. Like it's kind of like when you were learning to ride a bike, like training wheels are off now. Like here you go, either fall off the bike or learn how to ride it, kind of thing. But it's so awesome when you get there and you can do things on your own. And it's so funny, Jaden brought up the whole when you can verify results. That was definitely like an awesome moment. You're like, I can finally verify this under my name because I'm a real lab person now. It's not a joke anymore. Like it's so, but it's definitely different. It was different in a way though, because going from, seeing like a larger hospital on a smaller hospital scale, there's definitely a lot less, patients and a lot less people too as well that are working there. So it was funny because you get so many people, in a department at a bigger hospital, and then at the hospital there's like one person in each department. So it's kind of funny to like see that aspect, but nice at the same time because you're overseeing everything. So it's really nice to see that as well. But yeah, it was definitely nice when felt like I became like a real lab person.
Yeah.
Nice feeling.
And then now that you've been in the field for a year and you guys have really been full techs for a long time, probably not the full year, but probably like about 8 months you've been full techs working out there. How do you think going through this kind of rigorous MLS program, do you think it really prepared you, over prepared you, a good preparedness going into the field? How do you feel like it prepared you?
I think it honestly did a fine job, like especially getting that like clinical experience. Like you kind of learn that like time management also applies in the lab. When you're running QC in the morning and you're trying to do temps, but you still have patients to run. Like at BI Milton, we had 2 chemistry analyzers, and like I think third shift would take down one of them and do the maintenance and the QC, and then like when we came in on first shift, we would do the other one. And like we're still running patients on that second analyzer. So you're still having to worry about reporting stuff out. And if there's a critical, you got to catch it. And like, oh my God, I'm running QC. I have to see how that's going. Like, what do I need to put on? Oh my God, the phone's ringing. Somebody's calling me. They have a question. And like, I definitely like, I don't think I realized how much time management would apply like at the actual job too. So that was one like big thing that I think helped me like a lot, was remembering like, oh, okay, I gotta just like manage my time and the workflow will be fine. And two, like, I know sometimes you guys would say stuff like, not to scare us, but like, the whole, like, this is very serious. You're dealing with real patients' lives. You could kill somebody. Kind of have that playing in the back of your head too. And like, it kind of sounds a little morbid, but like, it really is a good way to like, kind of remind you to just like sit and really focus on things, because when you're multitasking and you're doing a lot of things at once, it's really, really easy to mess something up or mix up something. So it's definitely important. Like that was one big thing too, just kind of like focus on what you're doing, especially if you're working on one patient, like focus on that one thing, get it done, and then you can move on.
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. I know it's like time management really just implies in every aspect of your life. It's super important in the lab though, especially with working with patients. And like Jaden said, there's times that you're doing multiple things, and it's important to divvy up your attention, but then there's obviously some matters that you need to focus on just solely. So there's times I'll be like, something will just wait for a second and I'll just put this one thing focused, depending on what it is. But it's interesting to reflect back, saying like, okay, I'm almost a year into working at a lab. It's kind of weird. It doesn't even feel like it, honestly.
No, not at all.
It doesn't even feel like it. I would definitely say though, the program prepares you well, and it puts you to feel like, even when you're a new person, like a new lab person, you still feel like, okay, I still feel like I have enough information and I have enough knowledge that I can, work here and, work alongside your coworkers and feel like, all right, I know what's going on, and there'll be times too, though, like Jaden has said, that you have to ask questions and never be afraid to ask something. It's always better to ask a question than guess. You never want to guess in a lab, especially because you're dealing with people. It's not like you're, playing around like with stuffed animals. Always think of it like it's somebody, like it's one of your loved ones. You want them to get the best care. So everybody should be getting the best care possible. So, but I would say the program was great in preparing me, and I definitely felt like I was prepared when I got out there. And I was like, when I got there on my first day, I was a little nervous, obviously, 'cause we're all going to be a little bit nervous, but I felt like I was ready at the same time. And I was like, I'm ready to go out into the real world and just do my best and, and help save some lives,
Yeah, you guys definitely gave us a lot of confidence, I feel like, and just like, I guess like having, where the UMass students, like I remember when I went to my clinical site, they were like, oh, like you're the UMass student, like they always have such great things to say about the program and like how well prepared we are and how like knowledgeable we really are. And like, it makes you think like, okay, all this studying and all this, do your objectives, read your objectives. Thank you, Melissa, because your objectives saved my life. But yeah, like it's, I don't know, I was definitely ready. And I definitely felt like confident. Like I remember going into my first day, I started out in hemo, and we had like a Sysmex XN, and I was like, okay, I'm like, I know a little bit about the Sysmex, like a little bit. This one had like the slide maker, the SP, the slide preparer, and just like little things like my trainer would tell me or like ask me, and he'd be like, oh my God, you know that? Like, I forgot what one of the things he was like fascinated by. Oh, because I knew like hematocrit. He's like, oh, like what does the hematocrit mean? And I was like, oh, like that's packed cell volume. And he was like, yes, that's exactly what I wanted you to say. I was like, thank you, Melissa. I said, I will always remember packed cell volume.
Yeah.
And I remember all my formulas too. He's like, oh, how do you get it? And I'm like, yep, I know this. I'm like, feel good. And then when you like get something right, you're like, oh my God, yes. Like,
I know, it's true. Everybody, all the professors give you such a confidence boost because even, whether it was new material, old material, whatever we were learning, it's all of you are reminding us that the information, but it's just learning to slowly dig it out, especially as Professor Hart said when she was like, dusting off the cobwebs. And it's true, like sometimes you really have to dust off the cobwebs because it's things from like freshman year that we talked about. I'm like, I don't remember that. And I'm like, wait, I kind of remember. So, but it's really nice and everybody is so supportive there. And, it's so nice to have professors that care about their students, and to see you guys do that is awesome because it's just so nice to know that it's not just you teaching us the material and just so we're ready, but it's actually giving us that boost, like you guys can do it though, and you just have to keep working on it. And there'd be times that maybe you don't understand something, and everybody would always be like, come by office hours, or if that doesn't work, we can do this and this. And then when COVID happened, it was like, if you need something, like we'll chat on Zoom or whatever, even if it's not within this time. Everybody was always so helpful and always going out of their way for us, so it's really appreciated. And it's something that definitely I don't think that we'll ever forget. Jade, especially, like I know Jaden and I can say that. So
Awesome. Well, it sounds like you guys felt really prepared, but I think we prepared you most by beating time management into your heads.
which I bet you're so happy to hear about.
Literally, like, I know if Professor Hart hears this, she's gonna be like, oh my God, yes.
That's the last thing I ever thought you guys would be like. Time management.
I know. I used to roll my eyes.
Professor Hart too.
I would roll my eyes when you guys would say time management. I'd be like, okay, whatever. But like now, time management is my life. Time management rules my life because you have to. Especially on like second shift, I feel like. Because like, there's less people there. Like at Brockton with hemo, it's like we have the diff bench, you have the sysmex bench, then you have urine. So that's 3 people. And then, there's 2 people in chem and there's always 1 person in the bank. So sometimes, like, especially if I'm in the blood bank, being the only person, like sometimes, if I ever have free time, I come out to the main lab and I'm like, hey, what can I do for you? I'll set up a COVID if you want. Oh, do you have to go do something in micro? Cool. I'll take over. You're fine. Same thing too with like covering dinner, because you're always going to cover somebody's dinner. Or somebody's going to cover you. So you kind of have to be, you have to be flexible and able to be like, okay, I got this running in hemo. Let me go back to the bank and check on this. I got this running in micro. Let me go back to hemo and see this. Like, just being able to like move around and be flexible and like do more than one thing at a time. Like sometimes the processors would like joke and be like, Jaden, what department are you actually in? I'd be like, I don't know. I'm in all of them. I just do everything here now. It's fine.
It's so, I know, like floating around on second shift is like everybody does it. We all float around, we help each other. There'll be times like if you're in the bank and there's not a second person in chemistry, like sometimes that person will come out, or the person that's in, the coag and urine department will go over and help. And, we all just float around and whatnot and just see like, oh, what needs to be done and all that. So it's nice.
Listen, you second shifters, just leave me in special coag by myself. All right. Well, Dave, do you have any other questions that you want to ask?
Yeah, I think I had a question regarding like the culture of the labs that you're in. Like, was there like an adaptation to the cultures? I know like just like people, labs kind of have personalities, sort of. But yeah, what was your experience kind of integrating with the culture?
So on my clinical site, I had fun, but it was also a lot of like older women, and it was very like, not even to be like that, but a lot of just like stupid drama and very like, I don't know, kind of annoying. And I'm like, I don't really want to deal with this when I come to work. Like, I kind of just want to come to work and like do what I got to do and like have a fun time like with my coworkers. And when I started at Brockton, like it was really like a huge difference to my clinical site. And like people who have been there and worked at other labs say all the time, they're like, honestly, this is one of the nicest labs I've ever worked in. Like staff wise, like everybody's really friendly. Like everybody gets along really well there. There's definitely a lot of a sense of like a team, and everybody just like, I don't know, everybody helps everybody. And it's nice to have like that like dynamic there. And it's like that at Charlton too, which I really enjoy. I like that sense. And that's really why I like to like the smaller community-based hospitals. Because I don't know, I feel like you just kind of get close to the people you work with. You're with them every day, most of the time. So kind of gotta, you have to like who you work with too. Like that's a big part. Because if your work environment, like the work environment with your coworkers isn't great, then that's going to like spill into your work and you're not going to like what you're doing. And like, I never wanted that for myself. I'm like, I want to go into the lab and like enjoy it. I don't want it to be ruined by like kind of like how other people act and just kind of stupid petty things. I'm like, I love science. Like, I just want to be here and like nerd out and save lives and make some friends. So let's do that and not fight. But yeah, there you can definitely see like like you said, every hospital is different. Every lab has its own personality. So it was kind of cool to see like two completely different dynamics.
I would say in comparison to, so at Tufts, I feel like, so it was obviously different because each of their parts of the lab had a ton of different people in it. So blood bank was more, everybody was kind of to themselves in a sense because everybody had their own thing to work on. So there wasn't really a lot of chatting. And he was fun because everybody was like, working, but everybody chats with each other and like talks to each other. And it's like, having that work, you're working, but it's in a fun environment. So even though it was actually first shift, everybody was like chatting with each other and like talking and, all that stuff in it. There was definitely a vast, probably in that one had the biggest like different mix of people. Like there was younger people, middle people, and like people that were older, and everybody was just though like chatting with each other. It was kind of like it didn't even exist, which was nice. I like when that feels like that barrier doesn't exist. And it's the same thing where I work now. Like that doesn't really exist, that barrier. Like, well, I'll be chatting with each other on second shift, and it feels like sometimes people say like talk about things like their home lives and like their kids, and I'm like, they have kids? Like I just totally forget that whole dynamic. Like I'm like, wow, I just didn't even think about that. So, and then in the other departments at Tufts, it was kind of mixed again, like just lots of different people, but it was in micro was really nice too. Everybody there was super friendly, and just they would do their own stuff too, and because everybody would be at their own bench, but at the same time there'd be times that like people would have to like go to that bench to get something or whatnot. So it was nice. And then chemistry was definitely interesting because it's a lot of, obviously just a bunch of instruments there, but all the people there again would like sometimes talk to each other. There'd be some people that are more quiet than others, but that's kind of like at any hospital. There's some people that are more quiet, and then other people would be like chatting and whatnot and doing their stuff, but like just trying to make it fun, which I understand. You gotta do your work, but you also can't put yourself in an environment that's like, oh my gosh, like I'm just doing work like this. You have to at least make it, gotta have a laugh once in a while. You can't just put yourself like, oh my gosh, now I have to work 8 hours and I have to like I have to sit here for 8 hours. Like you can't have that mentality either. You want to be able to wake up and say, okay, I'm going to work today. Like, maybe it's a sunny day. I don't really want to work today, but at least I have good people to work with. So
yeah, not like, I'm stuck with Dave all day.
Yeah.
I feel like too, like every department kind of has their own personality in a way. Like they're like, oh, people like like especially with like micro and like the blood bank, like those are two very like kind of like things that people will specialize in and kind of get stuck. I feel like it's like that with every department, but a lot more so in like micro. Like they always say once you're in micro, you're kind of in there for life. Like you kind of, and if that's all you do, like that's fine. And it's kind of like that at the blood bank too. There's a lot of blood bankers who just strictly do blood bank and that's all they've ever done. So like it's, yeah, like I don't know, people always say like, the blood bank has its own personality, so do hemo. People in chemistry are a certain way, like, and I can definitely see that. Like I feel like with chemistry too, like maybe at least for me, I feel like chemistry can be so like high stress because it's a lot of what's the word I'm thinking of? It's a lot of troubleshooting and like trying to figure out what's wrong, and like adjusting things. And sometimes it can get frustrating because it's like, oh my god, I just made this cal and it's not like working. Like now I have to make a fresh one. Like, oh, maybe I need to remake the QC. Like kind of going through the lines, and like sometimes that can be really overwhelming and stressful when you have like your morning drops coming and you're trying to sit there and process all the specimens. Like and like I like at least now, like where I am at Charlton, I've been mainly in the blood bank, and like we have so much fun in the blood bank. And like the blood bank always is usually kind of like its own room. It's always kind of like off to the side. Like that's how it was in Brockton. We were in our own room. In Charlton, it's like not even in the main lab. You go like down the hallway and like there it is. So the blood bank's kind of like its own little world. And it's really fun. And I don't know, I never expected myself to be like an avid blood banker, but I actually enjoy it like a lot more than I expected. And I love hemo. Don't get me wrong. Hemo is my first runner up. I love me a good diff.
We're not offended. It's okay. I always say people have to like the other disciplines, so we don't have to like them.
That's true. That's a true statement. I would definitely say in school, I loved micro and I loved blood bank. So they're very polar opposite. And usually, when you go out into work, those two departments don't mix. So I was like, oh no, how am I going to get into these departments? But then when I did my internship, I ended up liking heme the most, which was like totally funny because in school I was like, I don't know if I like it as much as, blood bank or whatever. And I remember Professor Ouellette said, she pegged me and she says, you're going to be a blood banker. And I was very unsure because I was at that point, I think I was leaning more towards micro. She was like, nope, you're going to be a blood banker. And I was like, I don't know. And I really didn't at that point. I didn't know what department I wanted to just stick in if I picked one and just specialize. And then when I was, thinking about either specializing or doing more of, a generalist position, I was like, I almost want to do more of a generalist because then if I ever decide I want to do one discipline, I can go and do it. But I want to get a little bit of everything first and see if I'm, is this really the right one for me? And I'm glad I did that because I don't think, like, for example, I definitely wouldn't have wanted to do micro all the time, especially since too, like Jaden said, it's one of those things, once you get into micro, typically you don't get out of micro because usually people in micro just stay there. And I mean, there's so much to do in micro and see, so that's a good reason to stay. But it was really nice to get that whole idea of, okay, I get to see a little bit of everything. And now there, I would say I actually, it's like weird to say, I do like blood bank, and but as much as I like it, I do like heme. I like being able to see stuff in heme, and I like chemistry, which is like really weird. Like people would be like, you like chemistry, especially I feel like people and like the professors, like other professors from UMass would like laugh at me right now hearing me say I like chemistry. They'd be like, what the heck are you saying? But it's usually like I just like being in there and doing my thing and feeling like, oh, I know what I'm doing. And probably because that's one of the things that you're in school and you feel like, oh my gosh, I'm just never going to like chemistry. And then you get in the real world and you're like, oh, it's actually really not as bad as you think. It's really not. But I definitely like heme. Like I love heme. I haven't been actually in heme for a while at work. I've gotten put into chemistry and blood bank. So I do like blood bank though. I do enjoy being in blood bank and being in my own little world. So I always feel like blood bank and heme are sometimes competing with me. I'm like,
yeah,
one.
That's like how they are for me. They kind of compete with each other. At Charlton though, like where I'm working now, we have an open heart program. So they do at like anywhere between 2 to 5 open hearts in a day. So there's a lot of like issuing blood, and we get a lot of like interesting workups and stuff like that because Charlton, I don't know, I feel like they cover a big, like they're part of South Coast. They're kind of like the middle sister, and like St. Luke's has kind of become like our main lab.
But for everything heart, they send it to Charlton, right?
Yes, all open heart cases go to Charlton, and then St. Luke's is more like orthopedic surgeries. So a lot of total knees, a lot of total hips, shoulders, anything like that. But the open heart program is, I find it just like super cool. Like we set up the coolers that morning and we bring them upstairs, and, you know, like we do our little checks with the surgical techs. And I don't know, I really like doing like workups and stuff like that, and like trying to figure out things. Like, I don't know, it's like very investigative. Like I feel like you do a lot of investigating in blood bank when you're trying to figure like certain things out with patients. And I really liked that aspect. And then like chemistry, like if you asked anybody in school who liked chemistry, it was not me. Who liked it the least, it was me. But when I got to my clinical site, that is definitely the biggest like difference between like school and the work life. Like I got into chemistry and I was like, I kind of like this. Like this isn't bad. I was like, I like the hustle and bustle. I enjoy the troubleshooting a lot. Like I don't mind that, you know, kind of, you know, rack your brain a little bit. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed like the fast pace of things. Like the day kind of flies by when it's like that, because you're just, you know, loading samples on, loading stuff, calling criticals, resulting stuff. If you have to reject a specimen, you're doing all that. So yeah, I really like the hustle and bustle of the lab in general. I like being busy. I was a waitress for a long time, so kind of used to just do shooting around here and there. So I have taken that into my lab life, and it's definitely helped a lot.
Awesome. Well, we want to thank both Jaden and Eliana for taking the time with us. We took up a lot of your time, so we appreciate it.
Don't worry.
You sharing all of your knowledge and experience coming from the student perspective to the working professional. And like I said, I did not pay them to talk about time management. They did that all on their own.
Unsponsored ads, okay?
Unsponsored. I gave 0 prompts for that. None. That was it. That was them.
Yep.
All right. Well, Jaden and Eliana, thank you. And that's all that we have for this episode. So thanks for watching.
Yeah. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Please like, subscribe, and hit the bell if you'd like notifications whenever we post a new video. And feel free to reach out to us on social media or via email with comments or suggestions about future content. Thanks.